Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for joining what is going to be the first of a series of 5 different webinars. We're working, this is a collaboration between Framwellgate School, the Northeast Business Resilience Centre and Acronis. We're going to be effectively spreading out over a series of 5 webinars, 5 different topics which all deal with the same effective scenario. We had a school that was hit by a malicious attack, and today we're going to be talking about the threat landscape. The subsequent episodes in the series are going to be covering how cyber criminals were foiled after stealing school data and demanding payout, defensive tactics and meeting DFE and NCSC cybersecurity requirements and standards, risk and resilience, the role of cyber insurance in education, and finally, budgeting for security, financial planning for cyber compliance. Today, we're going to be covering the threat landscape, and I'm joined by 3 guest speakers. Our first speaker is Wendy Pattison. Wendy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hi, my name is Wendy Pattison. I'm the Chief Financial Officer. I'm a Business Director at Framwellgate School in Durham, and we did suffer a cyber attack back in September last year, and hence the support through NEBRC and Acronis, and that's why I'm here today with some outreach work.
Thank you, Wendy. Martin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, afternoon, everybody. So Martin Wilson, I'm a serving police officer in the northeast of England from County Durham, and I work in the Northeast Business Resilience Centre. You may have heard of cyber resilience centres. They're all live now up and down the country, but effectively coalitions of the willing. So partners like Acronis, policing, and academia all come together and work together to try and help small organisations like Wendy become more secure.
And last but not least, Joe.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Joe Cockcroft. I'm the Service and Technology Supervisor for the Northeast Business Resilience Centre. I'm also a cybersecurity graduate from Northumbria University.
Thank you, sir. And finally, I'm Ed Renwick. I'm a strategic partner manager here at Acronis, and I work with everybody on the call on a fairly frequent basis. So what we're going to do, guys, we're going to just cover a couple of slides off just to really set some context, set the tone, and then we're going to move into more of a panel discussion. So next slide, please. So as everybody on the call will be more than aware, certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a real spike in the threat landscape. Back in the day, the threats for downtime were not related to malicious acts, insiders, external threats. It was much more around acts of God, fires, floods, planes landing on buildings and things like that, and a bit of hardware failure, of course, as well. But these days, the threat landscape is almost 180 degrees different to what it was just 3-4 years ago. And obviously, the advent of home working, the mobility that's taken place over the last 3-4 years has only increased that threat vector, and also given rise to all of these threat actors who now have lots of different environments, lots of different platforms, and lots of different ways to go in and try and attempt to compromise environments. And as we all know, the education sector, certainly over the last few years, has been heavily hit by inside and external threats, usually by malware and ransomware attacks. So as you guys can see from the slide, there's a huge amount of new malware samples that are being created on a daily basis. What we're seeing is the life cycle of these is very short. They're only lasting a couple of days, and then there's something new coming out. So this is an ever-changing, ever-developing environment, and the threat actors within that landscape are only growing. It's becoming very easy for the average person to pick up a bit of software that's going to have some malicious intent to compromise a particular environment. And these days, there is no It's not necessarily about going after the big brands, the corporate brands that everybody recognizes. These threat actors have realized that everybody is there and everybody's fair game in their eyes. So it's incumbent upon us to put in some controls and measures to try and manage those threats. Next slide, please. As you guys will be aware from trade publications, what's going on in the news and what you may have already experienced yourselves, there's kind of two real big areas in which these threat actors are now starting to penetrate environments. Email phishing is probably the most prevalent of all of the routes in for these guys, and they're getting very sophisticated in the way that they're doing it. They're generating QR codes, they're using MFA and proxies to get past normal gates and gatekeepers to get into these environments and basically pretend they're genuine users. We've got the ability for these guys to effectively deploy tools that historically service providers have used, managed service providers of environments. Guys that you guys interact with, they're starting to use some of the tools that they use to break the code in some of the software that they use to get in through a different way and hit supply chain. And what we're seeing is supply chain is again another critical area that is being attacked. And obviously the modification of protection tools. These guys are looking to create havoc, to effectively take as much control of your environment. And usually, as you guys will be aware, a lot of these malicious executables will sit dormant in your environment for a little while. They could be gathering telemetry. They look like a normal file. Very difficult to find these in your typical day-to-day run-ins. Next slide, please. And as we know, the use of AI now, it's not back in the day like 1980s war games where you need someone at kind of NASA level to crack the codes and get into environments. We've got software now. Software is being designed to help these guys to automate the process, to just continually bang on doors till they find a vulnerability and get through. We've got now the advent of deep fakery, and you know, there's countless examples at the moment where senior executives within businesses are having their credentials stolen, they're having their voices recorded and authenticated through voice recognition. And there's been a number of live events that have happened very recently where these guys are using fake content, fake AI-based driven voice recordings and algorithms to effectively talk on behalf of senior executives and completely fool members of staff and suppliers and other people that they deal with. And it's about it. These guys are attacking APIs, they're attacking tokens, they're attacking every which way they can get into your environments, guys. And this is from sole traders right up to the Coca-Colas and the BPs of this world, the organizations we all know and love. I'll say that with tongue in cheek. Next slide, please. So what are we seeing as the kind of biggest cybersecurity trends at the moment? Ransomware will continue to pose a great threat. It's been grown and grown in terms of the threat vectors, and it still sits there and will continue to do so. Data breaches through into cloud environments. These guys are now looking to go through, as I mentioned earlier, supply chain, and not just get into one single organization, but use the tools that they've got and the tools that are within the supply chain to get right up and down that and compromise as much of that as humanly possible, or as virtual computer-based as possible, should I say. Messaging threats are definitely surging. That that rise in phishing attempts now represents a very high percentage of how these guys go through. And I know the guys at the NEBRC have got some great real-time stats around that. I believe it's around 80% of all attacks at the moment that are coming in are generated through phishing attempts. So if we've got something in place that mitigates that deals with encryption, deals with users, deals with your email security and your malware, your patching and all of the other areas that these guys get into, then you're very much in a good place. We can try and deal as much as we can with human errors, but we have complex environments. We have multiple applications that users are supposed to learn and understand best practices on. People make mistakes, and it's incumbent upon us to put in traps and filters to alleviate the effect of some of those, in many cases, honest mistakes that users make. And then obviously we've got generative AI. It's taken over everything that we do now, and in doing so, that creates, as well as there is a great upside to that, it creates untold challenges that we've got to manage and be mindful as well of. Okay, so that kind of ends the slideshow. Now I'd like to move into more of a panel discussion. I see that we're already getting questions through. Guys, just in terms of starting, I open this up to you, Joe, because I can see you first. In terms of in your experience working with schools and in the education sector, what would you say are the main cyber risks that they're facing? Joe, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So from what I've seen and from the schools that we've worked with, phishing, as you've already mentioned, it's a really common attack type. I mean, I'm sure everyone's gotten a phishing email at some point. So these phishing emails, primarily, the point of those is to grab credentials. They're not necessarily targeted emails. It's just whoever might fall for them. They send out thousands of these emails, and all they need is a couple of people to click on the link and put their credentials in, and then they can go from there. And phishing as well can lead into other types of attacks, such as ransomware. Ransomware is often delivered through phishing emails, and then that can evolve into data theft. Because ransomware these days, it's not just necessarily about encrypting all your data and holding you to ransom. More often than not, they actually take a copy of that data as well, so they have another area to hold against you.
Thanks, Joe. Martin, from your point of view, what do you see?
I think, yeah, definitely seeing a bit of a shift. Ransomware is still very much an issue, but there are quite a few crimes now that we see where actually they just steal the data. They don't actually deploy the ransomware, because in some respects that's the greater mischief. You know, are they ever going to release that data? Are you ever going to know if they release that data? Are they ever going to come back and try and extort you? How long is that a thing for? Is it 2 weeks after it's nicked, 2 months, 6 months, 12 months? With the ransomware, it's very much, because the problem with cybercrime, it's kind of intangible. With ransomware, you know there's an issue because you're locked out of all your machines and your networks, right? With that data theft, it's still very much like the shark in the water. So we definitely see a lot of that. And then the other thing from an educational perspective is DDoS, so the distributed denial of service attacks. So, you know, you may get a disgruntled pupil that maybe can go out and buy some stressor time, or with some tools might decide to point a DDoS at the website or some part of the network. You know, some schools always get what I would call a bit of an insider threat, and there's lots of them potentially. Now, I'm not saying that all pupils are insider threats. What I am saying is bright young people, curious, pushing the boundaries, may not know where the legalities lie. So yeah, there is that sort of extra conundrum that schools face.
Thanks, Martin. And Wendy, obviously you unfortunately have been on the receiving end, so I suspect you'll have a very definite view on this. But from your perspective, what have you seen, Wendy?
What I've seen is a very scary event, which schools generally aren't prepared for. They say they're prepared for it, they think they're prepared for it, but in reality, until it actually happens, you don't know what that means. So in reality for us back in September, there was a pretty major event, and then the business continuity plan that is written for such an event almost just rewrote itself as we went through the entire scenario and real scenario of what was going on, supported through good people, but really it's something that you've got to be honest here as a school, as a person in a school, as a senior team. You're not fully prepared for what it actually means to you and what actually happens to a school when you get such an emergency, and the impact then on the students, the staff, the school itself, reputational damage, etc. So that's key for me. It's a massive learning curve that we've gone through, and we've learned an awful lot, and we're in a much better place now, thankfully. But it's taken a nasty event to get us there, and many schools won't fortunately go through such an event. But are you really confident that you are ready for such an attack?
Thanks, Wendy. That's brilliant. Okay, in terms of again, and we'll go the other way around. So Wendy, I'll start with you for this question. Who are the perpetrators that you're seeing? And it'll be maybe slightly different with Martin and Joe, but in your example, who was the actual perpetrator?
The actual perpetrator was a nasty group, basically. Well, we will never necessarily know who the exact perpetrator was, because I've learned again that people sell data to other people, they sell credentials to other people, so it's difficult to know that. But we received basically effectively a ransomware attack, a ransom note via email, saying that we've got your data and we're going to do something with it unless you click on this link and pay us, effectively is what it was. But as I've learned along the lines, obviously working very closely with Martin in particular, we don't know if they were the perpetrators. What we found out was that they were in our network for a period of time, quite a long period of time, that we didn't know. So actually that data could have been sold on a number of times.
And Martin, from your experience, I know you deal with a lot of schools across the region. What's your experience of that? What are you seeing in terms of potential perpetrators?
Well, I've already alluded to one, and that's the potential for pupils or students. But I guess one of the biggest insights I could perhaps pass to people on this call, if they don't already possess this already, maybe I can just resonate it more, is in the first instance, the mindset of the bad guys is they just go after data, because data is valuable, whether you're a sole trader, school, FTSE 100 company. Okay, it may have different impacts, but we all handle and use data. And therefore, if we all need it, it can be nicked, it can be extorted. And ultimately, it's vulnerabilities that are targeted in the first instance, not organizations per se. That's their mindset. So what you may find is bad guys are scanning the internet purely looking for weaknesses. And if they find them, and more often than not, this is automated, if the bot finds them, they'll get a foothold into the network potentially. And at that point, they might not even know who that organization is, just that there's a weakness there. So, yeah, I think Joe may touch on this. I won't steal too much of his thunder. We do get instances of organised crime groups specifically targeting organisations for specific reasons. But in my view, whether it's an organised crime group or whether it's the bot, they're going to approach things in the same way in the first instance. And that's why it's incredibly important that some of the things I know that you guys do, Ed, and some of the guidance that's out there from the National Cybersecurity Centre really emphasises removing that low-hanging fruit. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. And Joe, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, well, yeah, in terms of the perpetrators, just to echo Martin and Wendy, really, it's obviously, sometimes it's groups, sometimes it's individuals. They'll just run automated scanners over a wide variety of IP addresses, and they're looking for what you've got exposed to the internet. So obviously you'll have your internal environment, then you'll have your external environment that's accessible to anyone with an internet connection. So they'll be targeting that constantly, looking at everything you're presenting, whether you've got some form of VPN, whether you've got a web page that's hosted on your network. They'll look through everything just to find one tiny hole, one vulnerability, no matter how small, that can then lead into wider exploits. And as I say, more often than not, it's not anyone specific that they're targeting. They're just looking for that tiny hole to get a foothold into your network.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, I know we're conscious of time here, guys, but and again, Martin, I'll start with you on this one. What top protective tips would you give educational stakeholders to take away and consider?
So the big one, sounds easy to say, difficult to do, is multi-factor authentication. Wherever it is possible to do so on an account or service, if it's available, please use multi-factor authentication. Now, the legitimate challenge you get when you speak to educational stakeholders is, how on earth am I supposed to do multi-factor authentication for hundreds, if not thousands of pupils? Certainly when they're younger kids and they can't remember their passwords, etc. And yeah, I get that, you know, a lot of multi-factors done via apps which are on phones, and kids are not supposed to have the phones in schools or in the classrooms. So what I would say is, pragmatically start to think of some solutions whereby you might be able to deploy and roll out multi-factor for staff accounts. By all means, please do that. And you could give the pupil accounts the bare minimum permissions they need to do their work, and segregate it, i.e. keep it completely separate from the staff accounts. Then if there is an issue, it's hopefully confined to the pupil environment rather than the teacher environment, depending on how all the network hangs together. And then the other thing is things like geolocation. And I know that this isn't infallible, but, you know, allowing only UK IP addresses to log in. Yes, there are VPNs, but in cybersecurity, this is all about, it's like an onion, defense in depth. If you get past one layer, they've got to get through something else. And again, I know that what's utopia is you would look to private sector partners like Acronis that probably have a lot of these solutions sort of automated, running in the background, that can spot the malicious logins, that can do all of this. Obviously, sometimes that can be out of price ranges, it just depends, but I would encourage people to have those conversations, to be really clear. I'm not getting any backhanders from Ed or anything like that on here to say any of this. I just know that, you know, one of the reasons why we have the NEBRC, policing's one pillar, academia and the students the other pillar is the private sector, because I don't have all the answers here, but we work with some really good people that potentially have some of the solutions. But key message from me is, please consider the MFA position.
Brilliant, thank you. Wendy, I think this is a quite pertinent question for your good self, and it kind of rolls in to another question that I also wanted to ask you in terms of before the attack. What were your thoughts on cybersecurity, and how at risk did you think you were before that attack took place?
Cybersecurity, it's a case of what is cybersecurity? You know, who knows what it is? What does it actually mean? Beforehand, you think, actually, we're secure. My network manager's telling me we're secure. Everything's done. We've been audited. We've got risk assessments in place. We've got a plan, like I said before. But really, in reality, that goes out the window. As soon as it hits, it is a completely different scenario, completely different. So you think you're okay, you think you've got everything in place, but really, have you, and how do you know you have? And a lesson for me, that if I may, is that I wish I'd heard of the word vulnerability assessment before then, because I think if we'd known what that meant and had done vulnerability assessments of the network, then we would have been in a much better place and wouldn't have had those vulnerabilities that those criminals actually found.
And so, kind of on the back of all that, Wendy, just to kind of finish off, and I think it's a great way to finish it. What advice, tips would you give to other stakeholders to kind of take away from this, and obviously your experience, other than vulnerability assessments?
Understand the impact that such an attack can have on your school. What happens if you have to lock the door within half an hour's notice, what happens then? What happens to the kids, staff, your business functions? Measure that risk, and measure the risk in relation to what is the financial implications around the risk. How can you insure against this risk? How can you insure against the uninsurables? What happens if the worst happens? And I think something that I've learned is, for the vast majority of people, we all think it's never going to happen to us. We're safe. We've got that safe network. But I've really learned it's not a case of if, but when, because it will somehow, directly or indirectly, it will impact on schools, and schools are a very vulnerable environment because of shortfalls in funding, not necessarily having big corporate, funds to fund the best staff that you can have. There's lots of vulnerabilities in schools, not just the network, but which kind of all perfect storm means that we are probably extra vulnerable to such things. So it's a case of not when, and then what is your plan, and what does it really mean when your network goes down? What does that mean to you as a school? What are you going to lose at that point in time? Are you ready for it?
That's brilliant, and that's a brilliant way to end, guys. Now I want to thank Wendy, Martin, Joe for your input today. Everybody on the call is very welcome to join the second session, where we will be delving much deeper into the actual event that Wendy had to work through and manage and deal with. The next session will be very much getting into the meat of that event. Thanks very much to everybody for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.